My name is Ruth. I'm 58 years old and I'm about to meet the granddaughter my son threw away like garbage. My hands won't stop trembling as I sit in this Sacramento community center clutching a crumpled adoption paper from 7 years ago. The document still smells faintly of the hospital where I first held her 20 minutes that changed my entire life. I can still hear my son Marcus on the phone, his voice cold as winter steel when he told me the news that shattered my world into 1,000 pieces. The baby's deaf, Mom, he said flatly, like he was discussing a defective appliance he planned to return to the store. We're giving her up and don't try to stop us. My hands form a gesture I've practiced 10,000 times over 7 long years, the sign for love in American Sign Language, each finger placement deliberate and full of promise. A social worker opens the door, her kind eyes meeting mine as she says the words I've dreamed about hearing since that terrible February day in 2018. She's ready to see you now. Before we dive into this story, I want to know where all of you are watching from today. Drop your city or country in the comments, because this journey spans from Portland to Sacramento and touches every corner of a grandmother's breaking heart. If you've ever fought for someone who couldn't fight for themselves, or if you believe family means never giving up, hit that like button right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happens next will show you that love isn't just a feeling, it's a language you choose to learn, even when the whole world tells you to walk away. 7 years earlier, back in 2018, my life looked like something from a greeting card commercial. I lived in a cozy craftsman house in southeast Portland, Oregon, where the cherry blossoms bloomed every spring and neighbors actually knew each other's names. I'd retired 3 years prior after 32 years of teaching fifth grade at Woodstock Elementary, and my husband Gerald had passed away peacefully in his sleep just after my retirement, leaving me with a paid-off mortgage and enough savings to live comfortably. My son Marcus was 29, then climbing the corporate ladder at a financial consulting firm downtown, married to Jennifer, a 27-year-old marketing executive with perfect teeth and an equally perfect life. Plan. We had Sunday dinners every single week without fail, and I thought I knew everything about my son's heart. When Marcus and Jennifer announced the pregnancy over pot roast and mashed potatoes one rainy October evening, I actually cried tears of joy right there at my dining room table. I'd been waiting for this moment since Marcus graduated college, dreaming of the day I'd become a grandmother, imagining myself reading bedtime stories and teaching a little one how to bake my famous chocolate chip cookies. Jennifer glowed with that early pregnancy radiance, and Marcus couldn't stop smiling as he showed me the ultrasound photo, a tiny bean-shaped blur that represented my future grandchild. I immediately started buying grandparenting books, joining online forums for modern grandmothers, and clearing out my spare bedroom to create a space where the baby could nap during visits. My sister Lorraine teased me about going overboard, but I didn't care because this was the role I'd been born to play. The pregnancy progressed beautifully through those first 6 months, and I was there for everything Jennifer would let me attend. I held her hair during morning sickness episodes, helped her pick out nursery colors at the paint store, and organized a baby shower that had 50 guests and enough gifts to fill an entire room. The gender reveal happened in my backyard in March, and when that balloon popped to release pink confetti, I knew my life was about to be blessed with a granddaughter. They decided to name her Lily after Jennifer's grandmother, and I spent hours embroidering that name onto blankets and onesies. Marcus seemed genuinely excited about fatherhood, talking about teaching his daughter to ride a bike and helping with homework, all those normal parent dreams that made my heart swell with pride. Jennifer had a textbook perfect pregnancy with no complications, no scares, nothing that prepared any of us for the bomb that would drop in her 7th month. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon in late April while I was planting tomatoes in my garden. Marcus's voice sounded strange, tight, and controlled, like he was trying not to break down completely, and he asked if I could come to the hospital right away. My first thought was something terrible had happened to Jennifer or the baby, so I dropped everything dirt still under my fingernails and drove the 15 minutes to Providence Portland Medical Center with my heart hammering against my ribs. I found them in a consultation room with a maternal fetal medicine specialist, and the doctor's face told me this wasn't a life or death emergency, but something they considered equally devastating. At 32 weeks gestation, advanced imaging had revealed that the baby had profound bilateral sensory neural hearing loss, a genetic mutation that meant my granddaughter would be born completely deaf. The doctor explained it carefully, using terms like cochlear structure and auditory nerve pathways. But the essential message was simple, and the baby was perfectly healthy in every other way, just unable to hear. My immediate reaction came from my gut, from 32 years of teaching children with all kinds of differences and abilities. So what I said, probably too loudly for that quiet room with its awful fluorescent lighting: "We'll learn sign language together, all of us, and she'll have a beautiful life." I looked at Marcus and Jennifer, expecting to see relief on their faces, expecting them to embrace this challenge the way parents are supposed to embrace their children's needs. Instead, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Jennifer had tears streaming down her face, but they weren't tears of relief or even normal fear about the unknown. They were tears of rejection, of anger, of something dark I'd never seen in her before. Marcus sat perfectly still, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working under his skin, and when he finally looked at me, his eyes were empty. The doctor excused herself, probably sensing the family storm about to break, and the moment that door closed, Jennifer said the words that started my nightmare. "We're considering options," Marcus said quietly, and I genuinely didn't understand what he meant at first. "What options?" I asked, thinking maybe he meant different doctors or early intervention programs. The silence that followed felt like falling into a frozen lake, shocking and disorienting. Adoption mom Marcus finally said each word, carefully enunciated like he was talking to a child. "We can't handle a disabled child, and we need to think about our future and our careers." I actually laughed because surely this was some kind of stress-induced temporary insanity. Surely my son, who I'd raised to be compassionate and strong, wasn't suggesting they give away their baby because she couldn't. "Here. She's not disabled," I said, my voice rising. "She's deaf, Marcus. Deaf people live full and happy lives. You're talking about your daughter like she's broken merchandise." Jennifer's response cut through me like a serrated knife. "We want a normal child, Ruth," she said, using my first name instead of Mom like she usually did. "This isn't what we signed up for, and we deserve to have the family we planned." The argument that followed was the worst fight I'd ever had with my son in 29 years. I begged, I pleaded, I showed them articles on my phone about deaf culture and successful deaf adults. I offered to help with everything, to pay for whatever they needed to be there every single day, if that's what it took. Marcus accused me of not understanding their lives, their stress, their plans for the future, as if a baby's worth could be measured against career trajectories and vacation schedules. Jennifer sat there, with her arms crossed over her pregnant belly, and I'll never forget the look on her face, like my granddaughter was an inconvenience she couldn't wait to dispose of. When I finally left their house that night, driving home through blurred vision from crying so hard, I told myself this was just shock talking, that they'd come to their senses once the initial fear wore off. I was so naive, still believing that blood ties and basic human decency would win out over their cold calculations about the perfect life they thought they deserved. Valentine's Day in 2018 will forever be branded into my memory as both the most beautiful and most devastating day of my life. Jennifer went into labor 3 weeks early, and Marcus called me from the hospital at 6 in the morning with the news that my granddaughter was being born. I threw on clothes and drove through freezing rain, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, still holding on to hope that seeing their daughter would change everything. When I arrived at the labor and delivery floor, a nurse directed me to the waiting room instead of the birthing suite, and I knew immediately that Marcus had left instructions to keep me away during the actual birth. I sat in that uncomfortable plastic chair for 4 hours, watching other families celebrate new arrivals, while my heart slowly broke into smaller and smaller pieces. At 10:43 that morning, a nurse finally came to tell me the baby had arrived, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, healthy and beautiful in every measurable way. I practically ran down the hallway to the recovery room, and what I saw when I entered made me want to scream at the injustice of the universe. Jennifer lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, her face completely blank, while a bassinet sat on the far side of the room with a tiny bundle inside. Marcus stood by the window looking out at the rain, his back to his newborn daughter, his shoulders rigid with tension. The baby was crying that newborn wail that should bring parents running, but neither of them moved, neither of them even looked at her. I walked straight to that bassinet, my feet moving on their own, and when I looked down at my granddaughter for the first time, the world tilted on its axis. She was absolutely perfect, with a cap of dark hair that would probably lighten to blonde like Marcus had as a baby, and when her eyes opened briefly, I saw they were the same bright blue as my late husband Gerald's eyes. Her tiny fists waved in the air as she cried, and I picked her up without asking permission, without caring about hospital protocols or my son's cold shoulder. The moment I held her against my chest, feeling her warmth and her weight and her realness, I fell completely and irrevocably in love. I whispered to her, knowing she couldn't hear me, but needing to say the words anyway. "I'll find you, sweetheart," I promised her, my tears falling onto her hospital blanket. "Grandma promises she'll find you no matter what happens." Those 20 minutes I held her, rocking her gently while her parents acted like she didn't exist, were 20 minutes I've replayed in my mind 10,000 times over the years that followed. A nurse eventually came to take the baby for routine tests, and once she left the room, I turned to face Marcus and Jennifer with every ounce of courage I could gather. The conversation that happened next killed whatever relationship I'd had with my son, stabbed it through the heart and left it bleeding on that hospital room floor. Marcus told me, his voice flat and businesslike, that he'd already contacted a private adoption agency specializing in special needs placements, which made me want to throw something at his head, because our Lily was not special needs. They'd found a family, he continued, deaf parents, who wanted a deaf child, and the paperwork was already in progress. I begged them one more time, getting down on my knees beside Jennifer's hospital bed like I was praying to saints. "Please," I said, "if you won't keep her, give her to me. Let me raise her. Let me be her mother. I'm only 51. I'm healthy. I have time and money and more love than you could possibly imagine." Marcus's response was cruel in its calculated practicality. "You're too old, Mom," he said, like he was explaining basic math to a struggling student. "You can't raise a special needs child at your age, and besides, we've already chosen the adoptive family." Jennifer finally spoke, her voice hoarse from labor. "We want to move on, Ruth," she said without a trace of shame or sorrow. "We're going to try again for a healthy baby, and we need you to accept this decision and support us." The word healthy hit me like a physical blow, and I realized in that moment that I'd raised a monster, or maybe Marcus had always been this person and I'd just been too blind to see it. I stood up, my knees aching from the hard floor, and told them both exactly what I thought of their decision, using language I'd never used in front of my son before. Then I walked out of that hospital room and didn't look back, even though everything in me wanted to grab that baby and run. The adoption moved forward with brutal efficiency, greased by money and private agencies that don't ask uncomfortable questions. Within 48 hours, my granddaughter was placed with her new family, and the records were sealed tighter than a drum. I consulted with a family lawyer that week, spending money I didn't really have to spare, desperate to find some legal avenue to stop this nightmare. She looked at me with genuine sympathy and told me the hard truth that grandparents have almost no rights in adoption cases unless they can prove the parents are unfit, and being heartless wasn't the same as being legally unfit. Marcus and Jennifer were educated, employed, married, with no history of abuse or neglect. The fact that they were giving up a baby for being deaf wasn't illegal, just morally bankrupt, and the court system doesn't intervene based on moral bankruptcy. I went home to my empty house and cried for 3 days straight, barely eating, not answering the phone when friends called to ask about the new baby. My sister Lorraine finally showed up with groceries, and tough love sitting with me on my couch while I sobbed into her shoulder. "Maybe it's for the best," she said, trying to comfort me with platitudes that felt like sandpaper on open wounds. "Maybe that baby will be happier with parents who actually want her, who understand her world." I knew Lorraine meant well, but her words just made me feel more alone, because nobody seemed to understand that this wasn't about what was best for Lily in some abstract way. This was about a grandmother's love that doesn't just disappear because paperwork says it should, about a promise I'd made to a tiny baby that I intended to keep no matter how many years it took. 2 weeks after the adoption was finalized, I called Marcus one more time, hoping that maybe some distance from the trauma of birth had softened his heart. He answered on the third ring, and before I could even ask how he was doing, he delivered news that made me physically sick. "Mom," he said with actual excitement in his voice, "we have something to tell you. Jennifer's pregnant again, 8 weeks along, and the doctor says everything looks perfect this time." I couldn't speak for a solid 10 seconds, my brain trying to process the fact that they'd replaced their daughter before she was even a month old, like she'd been a failed product they'd exchanged at a store. "You replaced her," I finally whispered, my voice breaking. "You threw away your daughter and already made a replacement." Marcus got defensive, saying I didn't understand that they needed to move forward with their lives, that dwelling on the past wasn't healthy. When he told me I needed to forget about the deaf baby and focus on supporting this new pregnancy, I did something I'd never done in my entire life as a mother. I slapped him hard enough to leave a red mark on his cheek, hard enough to make his eyes water. "Get out," he said quietly, his hand on his face, his eyes filled with anger instead of understanding. "Don't contact us again until you can be supportive of our family decisions." I left his house that day knowing I'd lost my son maybe forever, but also knowing I'd made a choice that I could live with. He'd chosen comfort and convenience over his own child, but I was choosing love and loyalty to a granddaughter who would never know I existed unless I fought like hell to find her. The door closed behind me with a finality that echoed through my chest, and I drove home through another rainstorm Portland, crying right along with me. That night I made a decision that would shape the next 7 years of my life, a decision born from grief and love and stubborn determination. I was going to find Lily no matter how long it took, and when I found her, I was going to be able to talk to her in her own language. March of 2018 found me sitting in front of my laptop at 2 in the morning, eyes burning from hours of research into adoption law and sealed records. The internet became my obsession, forums and support groups for people searching for adopted relatives, stories of reunions that took decades but happened anyway. I learned terms like non-identifying information and voluntary adoption registries, discovering a whole world of people trying to find pieces of their families across legal barriers designed to keep them apart. Every article I read, every success story, and every heartbreaking failure taught me that finding Lily would require patience, money, and more than a little bit of luck. Private adoptions with sealed records were the hardest cases, especially when the biological parents actively wanted no contact, but impossible wasn't the same as unlikely, and I'd never been the kind of woman who gave up easily. I hired a private investigator in late March, a former police detective named Walt who specialized in adoption searches. He charged me $3,000 up front, money I pulled from my retirement savings without a second thought, and spent 6 weeks following leads that went absolutely nowhere. The adoption agency refused to provide any information, citing privacy laws and confidentiality agreements. The hospital records were sealed. Marcus had used a lawyer who wouldn't return Walt's calls. After burning through my retainer, Walt called me with the news I'd been dreading. "I'm sorry, Ruth," he said, and I could hear genuine regret in his voice. "This one's locked up tighter than anything I've seen. Without cooperation from the biological parents or a court order you'll never get, I can't find your granddaughter." I thanked him for trying, hung up the phone, and allowed myself exactly 1 hour of despair before making a decision that would change everything. If finding Lily was going to take years, possibly decades, then I needed to prepare for the moment we finally met. The image that kept me up at night was finding her at age 10 or 15 or 20, finally standing in front of my granddaughter after years of searching, only to have her try to communicate with me in sign language while I stood there, helpless and unable to understand. That thought was unbearable, the idea that I'd spend years proving my love by searching for her only to be separated by a language barrier when we finally found each other. So, in April of 2018, exactly 2 months after Lily was born, I enrolled in American Sign Language Level 1 at Portland Community College. The class met Tuesday and Thursday evenings, and I was by far the oldest student, surrounded by college kids taking it as an easy language credit, and a few middle-aged people there for work requirements. Our instructor was a woman named Diane, 45 years old and deaf since birth, who taught with an interpreter for spoken announcements, but expected us to communicate directly with her in sign from day one. She had this way of looking at students that made you feel seen and challenged at the same time, her hands moving with a grace and speed that seemed impossible to ever match. That first class, she went around the room asking each person in sign why they were learning ASL, and when she got to me, I'd only learned a few basic signs, but managed to fingerspell my name and sign the word for grandmother, which was one of the first signs in our textbook. Diane raised her eyebrows, a facial expression I'd learned was a crucial part of ASL grammar, and asked me in slow, clear sign, with the interpreter voicing for those who needed it, why a grandmother was learning sign language. I didn't have the vocabulary to explain the whole story, so I simply signed the words baby and love, and searched my hands clumsy and uncertain. Diane watched me for a long moment, her dark eyes sharp and assessing, then nodded and moved on to the next student. After class, as I was gathering my books, she approached me with her interpreter. "You're here for a real reason," she signed, and even though I could barely understand her without the interpreter voicing, I felt the weight of her statement. "Most people in Level 1 drop out by week 3, but I don't think you will. Come to my office hours if you want to practice extra." I took her up on that offer, showing up to her tiny office every week, and gradually our practice sessions turned into something more as I shared Lily's story in halting sign and broken grammar. Diane told me her own story over those months of practice, and it broke my heart in ways that made me even more determined to find Lily. She'd grown up in a hearing family in rural Idaho, the only deaf person in her entire extended family, and not a single one of them had ever bothered to learn more than a few basic signs. Her parents had forced her into years of speech therapy, trying to make her talk clearly enough to pass in the hearing world, while her siblings treated her like she was mentally disabled just because she couldn't hear. She left home at 18 and found the deaf community in Seattle, where, for the first time in her life, she'd been surrounded by people who communicated fluently in her language. "You're doing what every deaf child wishes their family would do," she signed to me one evening, when I broke down crying in her office, frustrated by my slow progress. "Don't stop learning, Ruth. Don't ever stop, because when you find your granddaughter, you being able to sign with her will mean everything." I threw myself into ASL with the same intensity I'd once brought to my teaching career, practicing 2 to 3 hours every single night. I covered my house with sticky notes, labeling objects with their sign names, watched YouTube videos of deaf vloggers until my eyes crossed, and attended every deaf community event Diane invited me to. By December of 2018, I'd completed Level 1, Level 2, and was halfway through Level 3, progressing faster than any student Diane had ever taught. The language started to feel natural, my hands finding shapes and movements without conscious thought, my face learning to express grammatical information through eyebrow raises and head tilts and mouth morphemes. I dreamed in sign language, woke up fingerspelling words against my blankets, lived and breathed ASL until it became part of who I was. The Portland deaf community embraced me in ways I never expected, welcoming this hearing grandmother with a mission into their coffee chats and social gatherings. I met Calvin, a 62-year-old deaf carpenter who'd been teaching woodworking to deaf youth for 30 years, and Harper, a 38-year-old teacher at the Oregon School for the Deaf who shared teaching stories with me and helped me understand deaf education. They never treated me like an outsider or a charity case, instead bringing me into their world with generosity and warmth. Through them, I learned that deaf culture wasn't about what people couldn't do, but about a rich, vibrant community with its own language, history, art, and values. I attended my first deaf theater performance in November, a show performed entirely in ASL, with projected captions, and cried through the entire second act because of the beauty and expressiveness of the language I was learning. Meanwhile, the rift with Marcus deepened into a chasm that seemed impossible to cross. He and Jennifer had their second baby in December of 2018. A boy they named Ethan, who was born with perfect hearing and immediately became the golden child Marcus had always wanted. They sent me a birth announcement in the mail, a professionally printed card with Ethan's stats and a photo, but no invitation to meet him, no phone call, nothing that suggested I was actually welcome in this new child's life. I stared at that card for hours, looking at my grandson's face, feeling absolutely nothing, and that emptiness scared me. I should have felt something joy, or anger, or grief, but all I could think about was a little girl somewhere out there who'd just turned 9 months old, a little girl I'd held for 20 minutes and couldn't forget. My sister Lorraine staged what she probably thought was an intervention in January of 2019, showing up at my house with our cousin Beth and sitting me down for a serious talk. "You need to let this go," Ruth Lorraine said with her most serious older sister voice. "You're obsessed with a child you'll probably never find ignoring your actual grandson, destroying your relationship with your only son. It's not healthy, and you need to move on with your life." I listened to them talk at me for 20 minutes, these women who thought they understood loss, and when they finally ran out of steam, I signed my response, which, of course, they couldn't understand. Harper had taught me the perfect sign phrase, and I fingerspelled the English translation for them. "I'll never let go," I said. Never. They left my house, shaking their heads, convinced I'd lost my mind to grief, and maybe they were right, but some kinds of crazy are worth holding on to. The years between 2019 and 2021 blurred together in a pattern of work, study, and searching that became my entire existence. I reached interpreter certification level in my ASL studies by late 2020, passing rigorous exams that tested not just my signing ability, but my cultural competency and ethical understanding of the deaf community. With that certification, I started volunteering as a medical interpreter at free clinics around Portland, work that paid nothing but gave me invaluable experience and brought me into contact with dozens of deaf families. Every time I met a deaf child around Lily's age, my heart would jump, wondering if maybe, just maybe, this was her, but of course it never was. Portland's deaf community wasn't that large, and most families knew each other, so a mysterious adopted child would have been noticed. I joined every adoption reunion registry I could find online, creating profiles on sites like Reunion Registry and Adoptee Connect, filling out forms with the limited information I had about Lily's birth. Date of birth, hospital, adoption agency. Name the few medical details I'd managed to extract from that one conversation with Marcus's lawyer before he stopped returning my calls. Some registries required both parties to register before making a match, which meant Lily would need to be searching for me too, and at her age, that wasn't going to happen. Other registries accepted one-sided searches, but their success rates were depressingly low, and months would go by without a single lead or connection. I checked those sites obsessively anyway, logging in multiple times a day, like somehow my desperation would make information materialize out of thin air. In 2019, Marcus and Jennifer blocked me on all social media platforms after I made the mistake of commenting on one of Jennifer's Facebook posts about Ethan asking if she ever thought about her daughter. The comment was gone within minutes, and I found myself blocked from both their accounts, cut off from even the distant digital view of my son's life. My mutual friends reported back that Marcus was telling people I'd had some kind of breakdown, that I was harassing them about a closed adoption that was none of my business, painting me as the villain in a story where they abandoned their baby for being deaf. It hurt, but not as much as you'd think, because by then I'd already written Marcus off as a lost cause, a person I'd once loved who'd revealed himself to be someone I didn't recognize or respect. The COVID-19 pandemic hit in early 2020, shutting down the world and complicating everything. Deaf community events moved online to Zoom meetings, where I practiced signing into my webcam, and my volunteer interpreting work shifted to helping with telehealth appointments. The isolation of lockdown was hard on everyone, but in some ways it gave me more time to focus on my search, more hours to spend on adoption forums and reunion websites. I connected with other grandparents in similar situations, people who'd lost grandchildren to adoption or family estrangement. And while their stories didn't help me find Lily, they reminded me I wasn't alone in this particular kind of grief. June of 2021 brought the breakthrough I'd been praying for, though it came from an unexpected source. I'd joined a Facebook group called Adoption Reunion Stories, a community of thousands of people sharing their searches and successes, and I finally worked up the courage to post my own story anonymously. I wrote several paragraphs explaining the situation, without using names, describing a grandmother searching for a granddaughter given up at birth because she was deaf, asking if anyone had resources or advice. The responses flooded in within hours, dozens of comments offering sympathy and support and practical suggestions. Most were kind but generic, telling me to stay strong and keep searching, but one message stood out from a woman whose profile name was Iris Coleman. Iris sent me a private message that said simply, "I specialize in closed adoption searches, particularly ones involving infants with disabilities that families rejected. I've never failed to find someone if they're findable. Let me help you." I clicked on her profile and found a woman in her late 60s with gray hair and kind eyes whose About section explained that she'd been searching for her own adopted daughter for 40 years before finally finding her, and now she dedicated her retirement to helping others. We moved our conversation to email, and I sent her every scrap of information I had, which, honestly, wasn't much. Lily's date of birth, the hospital name, the adoption agency, the city where Marcus and Jennifer lived at the time, anything that might give her a starting point. She told me up front that this could take months or even years, that sealed private adoptions were the hardest cases, but that she had connections with retired social workers and adoption agency employees who sometimes helped off the record. Iris worked her magic through the summer and fall of 2021, and I tried not to get my hopes up while simultaneously checking my email every 5 minutes for updates. In December, she called me instead of emailing, which I'd learned meant she had real news. "Ruth," she said, her voice warm even over the phone, "I found something." An employee who used to work at the adoption agency retired in 2020 and is willing to talk about cases from before she left. She remembers your granddaughter's case because it was unusual, a healthy newborn being placed just because of deafness. I held my breath while Iris continued. The baby was placed with a deaf couple in Seattle, Washington, both parents deaf from birth, who'd been on the waiting list for over 3 years. Names Warren and Cora, no last names yet, but she's working on getting me more information. Seattle was only 3 hours north of Portland, close enough that I could have driven there 100 times in the past 3 years if I'd only known. I asked Iris what happened next, and she explained that finding last names and current location would be the next challenge, that the couple might have moved in the years since the adoption, that this process required patience. I thanked her profusely, told her I'd wait as long as it took, and then hung up the phone and cried for an hour straight, relief and frustration mixing together. Lily was out there less than 200 miles away when the adoption happened, possibly still close by, and I still couldn't reach her. Calvin came over that evening, somehow sensing I needed company, and I signed the whole update to him while my hands shook with adrenaline. He responded with the kind of wisdom I'd come to expect from my deaf friends. "Finding her is part one," he signed. "Being ready to meet her is part two. You've done the work to be ready. Now trust the process." January of 2022 brought disappointment when Iris called to tell me that Warren and Cora had moved from Seattle to California in 2020, leaving behind a forwarding address that led to another forwarding address that eventually hit a dead end. The trail went cold just when it had started to warm up, and I spent a week wallowing in frustration before pulling myself together and reminding Iris that I wasn't giving up, that she should keep looking no matter how long it took. She promised she would, and I went back to my routine of work and study and waiting, trying to trust that the universe would eventually align in my favor. Some nights I lay awake, wondering what Lily looked like. Now, whether she had Marcus's smile or Jennifer's nose, whether she was happy with Warren and Cora, whether she ever wondered about the biological family who'd given her away. The phone call that broke 4 years of silence came on a Tuesday morning in March of 2022 from a number I didn't recognize, and I almost didn't answer because I assumed it was spam. Something made me pick up on the fourth ring, and I heard my son's voice for the first time since that awful hospital visit saying "Mom," in a tone that was half plea and half demand. My entire body went rigid, decades of maternal instinct warring with the anger I'd nursed for 4 years, and I asked coldly why he was calling me after all this time. "We need to talk," he said, and I could hear exhaustion in his voice, a weariness that hadn't been there before. "Please, Mom, I really need your help." Against every bit of common sense I possessed, against the advice I knew Calvin and Diane and Harper would give me, I agreed to meet him for coffee. We met at a Starbucks in downtown Portland 2 days later, neutral territory where neither of us had home field advantage, and when Marcus walked in, I barely recognized him. He'd aged 10 years in the 4 that had passed, with new lines around his eyes and gray threading through his hair at the temples. He'd lost weight, too, his expensive suit hanging looser than it should have, and when he sat down across from me with his overpriced latte, I saw his hands were shaking slightly. He started with small talk, asking how I'd been, as if we were distant acquaintances, instead of mother and son who hadn't spoken since I'd slapped him in his own house. I cut through the pleasantries and asked him directly what he wanted, why he'd broken years of silence to suddenly need me. "Jennifer and I are divorcing," he said, and even though I'd prepared myself for bad news, the bluntness of it surprised me. I didn't feel sorry for him exactly, but I'm human enough to recognize pain when I see it. "She cheated on me," Marcus continued, his voice flat like he was reporting stock prices. "With my business partner Greg, the guy I brought to your house for Thanksgiving 3 years ago. They're together now, moving in together, and she wants full custody of Ethan." I let him talk, watching him carefully for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but mostly I just saw a broken man who'd built his perfect life on sand and was shocked when it collapsed. He went through the details, the discovery of the affair, the confrontation, the lawyers, all the predictable tragedy of a marriage falling apart, and I listened without offering sympathy or judgment. Then he got to the real reason he'd called me, and I felt my jaw clench with familiar anger. "I have primary custody of Ethan," he said, "because Jennifer's new relationship made her look unstable to the mediator. But I can't do this alone, Mom. I'm working 60-hour weeks and I can't afford full-time childcare on top of the divorce costs. I need your help with Ethan. I'll pay you, obviously, whatever rate you think is fair, but I need family right now." The audacity of it stole my breath for a moment, this man who'd abandoned his first child and cut me out of his life, asking me to step in and save him from the consequences of his choices. "You abandoned your first child," I said, quietly signing the words at the same time out of habit. "And now you want me to help you with your second. How is that remotely reasonable, Marcus?" He tried to justify it, saying that situation was different, that he and Jennifer had made a decision together that seemed right at the time, that they were young and scared and didn't know how to handle a special needs child. Every word out of his mouth made me angrier because he still didn't get it, still couldn't admit that what he'd done was monstrous. That was different, how I asked, my voice rising enough that other Starbucks customers looked over. Different because Ethan can hear, because he fits your definition of normal. Marcus flinched like I'd hit him again, and I saw real shame cross his face for just a moment before his defenses went back up. "You don't understand the pressure we were under," he said, and I laughed, an ugly sound with no humor in it. I asked him the question I'd wanted to ask for 4 years. "Do you ever think about Lily?" The confusion on his face was genuine, and that made it so much worse. "Who's Lily?" he asked, and in that moment I wanted to throw my coffee in his face. "Your daughter," I said, loud enough that the barista looked over nervously. "The baby girl you gave away 4 years ago because she couldn't hear. You don't even remember her name." Marcus went pale, then defensive, saying that was in the past and he'd moved on and I should too. That's when I realized he'd never thought of Lily as a person, just as a problem he'd solved and filed away in the cabinet of regrets he didn't want to think about. I made him an offer that I knew would either result in a breakthrough or permanent estrangement. "I'll help you with Ethan," I said slowly, making sure every word landed with weight on one condition. "You help me find Lily. You contact the adoption agency using your parental rights, you reopen the case, you give me every bit of information you have access to." Marcus's face went from hopeful to horrified in the span of a heartbeat. I can't do that, he said immediately, and I asked why not, with false innocence. Because I signed away my rights, he said the words, coming fast and defensive. I can't reopen the case, and even if I could, why would I want to? She's got a family now, and dredging up the past would just hurt everyone involved. The truth hit me like cold water. You mean you won't? I said, standing up and gathering my purse. Not can't, but won't, because helping me find her would require you to face what you did. Marcus reached for my arm, his face desperate, begging me to reconsider, saying he really needed me, that Ethan needed his grandmother. I pulled my arm away and looked him straight in the eye. You're choosing your comfort over your daughter again, I said. 4 years ago you chose it over Lily, and now you're choosing it over making things right. We're done, Marcus. Don't call me again. He tried to argue, saying I was choosing a child I'd never met over my own son, and my response came from a place of absolute clarity. You chose your convenience over your own daughter, I said. We're even. I walked out of that Starbucks and blocked Marcus's number before I even got to my car, my hands shaking so hard I could barely use my phone. He sent texts from different numbers over the next few days, messages that ranged from angry to pleading to accusatory, calling me selfish and a terrible grandmother and every other hurtful thing he could think of. I blocked each number as it appeared and eventually told my phone carrier to block any new numbers from his area code. When I told Iris what had happened, she told me she was proud of me, that setting that boundary took real strength, and that Marcus had revealed he would never be the ally I needed in finding Lily. Calvin said something similar in sign when I showed up at Def Coffee Chat that weekend looking like I'd been hit by a truck. Family is who shows up, he signed, not who shares your DNA. We're your family now. April of 2022 exploded into my life like fireworks. When Iris called me at 7 in the morning, her voice crackling with barely contained excitement. I found them, she said without preamble, and I almost dropped my coffee mug on my kitchen floor. Through deaf community connections in California, I tracked down Warren and Cora Fletcher in Sacramento. They moved there in 2020 from Seattle for Warren's job. I've got their Facebook profiles, Ruth, and there are photos. Pictures of a little girl with blonde hair and blue eyes, and the birth date matches perfectly. It's her. It's Lily. I made Iris send me the Facebook links immediately. And the moment those profiles loaded on my laptop screen, my world shifted into sharp focus for the first time in 4 years. Warren Fletcher's profile showed a man in his early 40s, with kind eyes and laugh lines standing in what looked like a woodworking shop. Cora Fletcher's profile picture was a woman about the same age, with dark, curly hair holding a camera, and her bio said she was a freelance graphic designer. But it was the photos scattered through their feeds that made me cry so hard I couldn't breathe. Lily, at age 4, playing at a playground, her hands forming signs as she communicated with someone off camera, her face split by the biggest smile I'd ever seen. Lily, at age 5, on what the caption said was her first day at California School for the Deaf in Fremont, wearing a backpack almost as big as she was. Lily, at age 6, and then 7 birthday parties and holiday photos and ordinary moments that documented the life I'd missed. I stared at those photos for 6 straight hours, memorizing every detail of my granddaughter's face, tracing the ways she looked like Marcus, and like my late husband, and like some mystery combination that was entirely her own. She looked happy, genuinely, joyfully happy in every single photo, surrounded by deaf friends and deaf family members signing away with the fluency of a native language user. The captions, Cora wrote, talked about Lily's love of art, and her success in school, and her fierce independence, painting a picture of a thriving child who'd been given exactly what she needed. Part of me felt overwhelming relief that she'd landed with parents who clearly cherished her. But another part felt crushing grief. For all the moments I'd missed, all the birthdays and first days of school and bedtime stories. I'd never get back. Calvin came over that afternoon because I'd texted him incoherently about finding Lily, and he found me still sitting at my laptop, tear-stained and overwhelmed. He looked at the photos over my shoulder and signed with his characteristic directness. She's beautiful, and she's happy. That's what matters. I signed back that I knew he was right, but that I should have been there for all of this, that I was her grandmother and I'd missed 7 years of her life. Calvin pulled up a chair and signed something that shifted my perspective. "You're here now," he said. "That's what counts. You spent 4 years learning her language so you could talk to her. That's more than most hearing families do. Now you need to decide what comes next." What came next was the hardest decision I'd ever faced, harder even than deciding to search for Lily in the first place. I had Warren and Cora's contact information, their Facebook profiles, their address in Sacramento that Iris had found through public records. I could show up at their door, send them a message, insert myself into Lily's life whether they wanted me there or not. But doing that felt wrong, like putting my needs ahead of Lily's well-being, and I hadn't spent 4 years learning deaf culture and values just to ignore them when it mattered most. I needed advice from people who actually understood the situation from a deaf perspective, so I called an emergency meeting with Diane, Calvin, and Harper at a coffee shop that weekend. They listened to the whole story signed in ASL so we could have a truly private conversation in the middle of a crowded cafe, and then gave me the reality check I needed. Diane signed first. "You have to be honest with them. Explain who you are and what happened, but make it clear you're not trying to take Lily away or disrupt her life. You're asking permission to be part of her world, not demanding it." Harper added her perspective as a teacher who'd worked with deaf adopted kids. "Be careful not to make this about your grief. Warren and Cora are her real parents, and if you come in acting like you're the victim here, they'll shut you out to protect her. Show them you respect their family and deaf culture." Calvin's advice was simplest and most direct. "Write in ASL structure," he signed. "Show them you actually learned the language, that you're not just another hearing person who expects deaf people to accommodate you." I spent 2 weeks crafting a letter to Cora, writing and rewriting it dozens of times, asking Diane to check my ASL grammar and phrasing to make sure it would translate well to video if Cora preferred to read it in sign language. The final version explained everything: who I was, how Marcus and Jennifer had given Lily up, how I'd begged them not to and been ignored. I included photos of myself, screenshots of my ASL certification, proof that I'd spent 4 years preparing for this moment. The key paragraph took me hours to get right, balancing honesty with humility. "I don't want to take her from you or disrupt the beautiful life you've built," I wrote. "I can see from your photos that you're wonderful parents and that Lily is thriving. I just want her to know she has a grandmother who never stopped loving her, who spent 4 years learning sign language because I wanted to be able to communicate with her. I don't expect anything, but I'm hoping you'll give me a chance to meet her just once so she knows she wasn't forgotten." I found Cora's email address through her graphic design website and sent the letter on May 15th, 2022 at 3 in the afternoon, and then I proceeded to have a complete nervous breakdown. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, checked my email every 5 minutes even though I knew that was insane. Days passed with no response, and I started to think maybe the email had gone to spam, or maybe Cora had read it and decided I was a threat to be ignored. A week of silence stretched into the longest 7 days of my life, and I genuinely started to wonder if this was where my search would end, so close, but still impossibly far from my granddaughter. On May 22nd, 8 days after I sent the email, a response appeared in my inbox with the subject line, "We need to talk, video call." The email was brief, just a Zoom link and a request to call that evening at 7 Pacific time, signed by both Cora and Warren Fletcher. I spent the intervening hours absolutely terrified, practicing what I would sign, changing my shirt 3 times, setting up my laptop in the living room where the light was best. At exactly 7 o'clock, I clicked that Zoom link with shaking hands, and the screen filled with two faces I'd studied from Facebook photos. Warren and Cora sitting side by side on a couch, both looking serious and guarded. I introduced myself in ASL with voice off, explaining that I preferred to sign if they were comfortable with that, and I saw surprise flicker across both their faces. Cora signed back. "We got your email and were shocked," Warren added. "We were told the biological family didn't want any contact ever, that the adoption was completely closed." I explained as clearly as I could. that my son and his wife made that decision without consulting me, that I'd begged them to keep Lily and offered to raise her myself. I showed them the adoption papers I'd gotten through my lawyer, pointed out the places where Marcus had signed away his rights, showed them text messages where I'd pleaded with him to reconsider. Cora's face softened as she watched me sign, and she interrupted to ask the question that mattered most. You really learned ASL for her, for a child you'd only held for 20 minutes. I would have learned 100 languages if it meant I could communicate with her. I signed back, and I meant every word. That answer seemed to crack something open in both of them, and the conversation shifted from guarded to cautiously open. Warren and Cora told me their side of the story, and it broke my heart in new ways. They'd been on adoption waiting lists for 3 years because many birth parents specifically requested hearing adoptive families not wanting to place their hearing babies with deaf parents. When the agency contacted them about a deaf newborn, they'd been ecstatic, viewing it as meant to be. But here's the part that made me want to scream. The agency had lied to them about Marcus and Jennifer's motivations, telling Warren and Cora that the birth parents specifically wanted a deaf family because they believed Lily would be better understood and loved in deaf culture. That's a complete lie. I signed my hands, probably too aggressive with emotion. My son didn't care about Lily's well-being or deaf culture. He just wanted to get rid of a baby he considered defective. The agency made his abandonment sound noble, so you'd feel good about the placement. Cora and Warren exchanged a look, and Warren signed that they'd suspected something like that but had chosen to believe the story they were told because it made the adoption feel less tragic. Cora took over signing, explaining how they'd raised Lily with full access to deaf culture, ASL, from day one, enrollment in deaf schools, connections to deaf community. She's thriving, Cora signed with obvious pride. She's happy and confident, has lots of friends, excels at art. She knows she's adopted and that her birth parents couldn't handle having a deaf child. We've always been honest with her. I asked the question that terrified me most. What do you want from us? Cora signed, and I had to take a breath before answering. Just to meet her once, I signed slowly, making sure every sign was clear. To tell her I never forgot her and that I love her. That's all I'm asking for. I'll respect whatever boundaries you set. Warren and Cora talked to each other and signed for a moment, a private conversation I politely looked away from, and then Cora turned back to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Just as we were discussing next steps, my phone started exploding with text messages, the vibration audible even through the computer speakers. I glanced down and saw Jennifer's name, Marcus's ex-wife, who I hadn't heard from in years. I heard what you're doing, her first text read. You need to stop. More messages followed in rapid succession while I tried to focus on the Zoom call. You're going to ruin that child's life. Leave her alone. Marcus told me everything. The messages escalated in tone and threat, and finally I showed my phone screen to Warren and Cora. If you contact those people, I'll sue you for harassment, one message read, followed by I have connections with CPS, and I'll report the Fletchers for letting a stranger contact them about their adopted child. Warren's expression went from concerned to angry, and he signed firmly. Who is this person? I explained. That Jennifer was Marcus's ex-wife, the woman who'd refused to even hold Lily at the hospital, and Cora's response was immediate. She has no rights here, she signed. None. Our adoption is legal and ironclad. But Warren raised a valid point. This is exactly why we need to be careful, he signed. For Lily's sake. We can't have biological family drama disrupting her life. I understood, completely assured them I would block Jennifer immediately and that she had no actual power to cause them problems, but I could see the situation had spooked them. After a tense few minutes, Warren and Cora proposed a compromise that was more than I'd dared hope for. We'll let you meet Lily, Cora signed, but we need to do this carefully and slowly. First meeting will be in public, casual, no pressure. We'll introduce you as a friend of the family who knew her birth family. If Lily is comfortable and things go well, we'll eventually tell her you're her biological grandmother. I agreed immediately, grateful beyond words that they were willing to trust me at all. We set a date, June 15th, 2022, at a park in Sacramento, and I had exactly 1 month to prepare for the most important meeting of my entire life. The month between that Zoom call and June 15th felt like both the longest and shortest period of my entire life, every day crawling by with agonizing slowness, while somehow the date rushed toward me faster than I could prepare. I practiced ASL for hours every single day, running through every possible conversation topic, perfecting my child-friendly signing vocabulary, drilling myself on deaf culture etiquette, until Diane told me I was overthinking it. "Just be yourself," she signed during one of our practice sessions. "Kids can sense authenticity, and you've got that in spades. You've spent 4 years preparing for this. You're ready." I bought age-appropriate gifts, deliberating for hours in the bookstore over which deaf culture children's books would be perfect, settling on a collection of stories about deaf characters having adventures and a beautiful illustrated ASL dictionary. The stress took a physical toll I hadn't anticipated, and I lost 10 pounds that month because food tasted like cardboard and my stomach was constantly twisted in knots. Calvin checked on me almost daily, bringing groceries and making sure I ate something, signing encouragement when I spiraled into anxiety about all the ways the meeting could go wrong. Harper sent me videos of her students at the deaf school, showing me how natural and joyful 7-year-olds could be when they were comfortable, reminding me that Lily would probably be curious and open rather than scared or resentful. The night before I was supposed to drive to Sacramento, I couldn't sleep at all, just lay in bed staring at Lily's photos on my phone, memorizing every detail of her face, praying that I wouldn't somehow mess this up. I drove to Sacramento on June 14th, checking into a hotel near McKinley Park where we'd agreed to meet, and spent the evening pacing my room like a caged animal. I tried watching TV to distract myself but couldn't focus on anything. Tried reading, but the words swam on the page. Finally just sat on the bed looking through every photo. Warren and Cora had posted tracing my granddaughter's growth from infant to 7-year-old. Sleep came in fitful patches, and I woke up at 5 in the morning on June 15th, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, exhausted but wired with adrenaline. I changed my outfit 4 times, settling on casual but neat, practiced my introduction in sign in the hotel mirror, and arrived at McKinley Park a full 30 minutes early. The park was beautiful that morning, early summer sunshine filtering through old oak trees, families already arriving with picnic blankets and kids on bikes, the kind of perfect California day that felt almost too good to be real. I sat on a bench near the playground area where we'd agreed to meet, watching the entrance path, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. At exactly 2 o'clock, I saw them, Warren walking on one side, Cora on the other, and between them, holding both their hands, was a little girl in a purple dress with her blonde hair in 2 perfect braids. Lily was smaller than I'd expected from her photos, delicate-boned and probably light for her age, but her presence had an energy to it, a brightness that I could see even from a distance. As they got closer, I stood up, and my knees nearly gave out when I saw her eyes, those bright blue eyes that were exactly like Gerald's, exactly like I remembered from when she was a newborn. Cora signed something to Lily as they approached, and Lily looked up at me with open curiosity, no fear or shyness in her expression. Cora introduced us in sign, and Lily immediately signed "Hi, Ruth" with a big smile that crinkled her eyes at the corners. I signed back, "Hi, Lily, it's so nice to meet you," and my hands were shaking so badly I almost messed up the signs, but she didn't seem to notice. We all sat down on the bench together, and Lily immediately pulled out a stuffed rabbit from the small backpack she was wearing, signing that its name was Clover and it was her favorite toy. I asked in ASL what else she liked to do, and she launched into an enthusiastic signed explanation about her art classes at school and how she was learning to paint with watercolors and how her best friend Maya was teaching her to do cartwheels. The conversation flowed naturally, easily, like we'd known each other forever instead of meeting for the first time, and I realized Cora and Warren had prepared her well for meeting new people. Lily asked me where I lived and what I did for work, and when I explained, I used to be a teacher, her face lit up. My teacher, Miss Johnson, is the best, she signed, with the exaggerated enthusiasm of a 7-year-old. She teaches us about deaf history and famous deaf people. Do you know about Helen Keller? We went back and forth about Helen Keller and other deaf historical figures, and I was struck by how confident Lily was, how articulate in her signing, how completely comfortable in her deaf identity. At one point, she asked me, "Do you know sign language good?" And I signed back, "I've been learning for 4 years because I wanted to make deaf friends like you." Lily thought about that for a moment, her face serious, then signed. Why it was such a simple question, but it held so much weight, and I had to be careful with my answer. Because I wanted to understand deaf culture better, I signed, which was true if incomplete. And because sign language is beautiful and I love learning languages, that answer satisfied her, and she signed, "That's cool," before launching into a story about how her Papa Warren was building her a treehouse in their backyard. The hour passed like minutes, just talking and laughing and watching Lily sign about her life with such obvious joy that I couldn't help but smile even through my tears. When Cora finally signed that it was time to go, Lily surprised me by giving me a spontaneous hug, her small arms wrapping around my waist. "Can you come back?" she signed when she pulled away, and I looked at Cora, who nodded with a small smile. "If your mom and dad say yes," I signed to Lily, "I would love to come back." Lily looked at Cora with the kind of pleading expression that only kids can pull off, and Cora signed to her, "Yes, Ruth can visit again," and Lily actually jumped up and down with excitement, signing "Yay," before taking Warren's hand to walk back to their car. I watched them leave, Lily turning around twice to wave goodbye, and I felt something in my chest that had been frozen for 4 years finally start to thaw. This was real. This was happening. I'd found my granddaughter and she'd hugged me and wanted to see me again, and for the first time since that terrible February day in 2018, I felt like maybe everything was going to be okay. I was walking back to my car, still crying happy tears and replaying every moment of the meeting in my head when I heard someone call out, "Mom." The voice came from behind me, and I turned around to see Marcus standing about 20 feet away, near the park entrance, and my entire body went cold. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharp with shock and anger. "Jennifer told me what you did," he said, walking closer, and I realized he must have been watching from a distance, spying on my meeting with Lily. "I came to stop you from making a huge mistake." The audacity of it, the sheer entitlement to think he had any right to interfere, made me see red. "It's done, Marcus," I said, not bothering to keep my voice down. "I met her, and she's beautiful, and you should be ashamed of yourself." He tried to argue, saying I had no right to contact Warren and Cora, that I was going to confuse Lily and mess up her life, all the same arguments he'd made 4 years ago when I begged him not to give her up. "You're going to confuse her," he said, and I laughed bitterly. "Her life is perfect," I shot back. "Her parents are wonderful, she's thriving, she's happy and confident, and everything a 7-year-old should be. You should be grateful she ended up somewhere so good, instead of wherever your callous abandonment could have sent her." Marcus's face twisted with something ugly, and he said the words that finally severed whatever tiny thread still connected us. "I don't care about her," he said coldly. "I never did. She was a mistake, and I'm glad she's gone from my life." I slapped him for the second time in 4 years, harder than the first, and I didn't care who saw or what they thought. "Don't you ever call her that," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "She's not a mistake. She's a beautiful child who deserved better than you." Warren and Cora must have seen the confrontation from their car, because they came back over Warren, putting himself between me and Marcus, while Cora stood slightly behind. Warren signed to me, "Is this him?" And I nodded, signing back, "Yes, this is Marcus, Lily's birth father." Cora's face filled with disgust, and she signed something I knew was harsh based on her expression and body language, though I was too rattled to catch every sign. Warren spoke aloud, his deaf accent thick but his words clear. "Leave now. You have no rights here." Marcus looked confused because he couldn't understand sign language and had no idea what Warren and Cora were saying, and that seemed to make him angrier. "You can't keep me from my biological daughter," he said, playing a card he had to know was worthless. Warren's response was firm and final. "You gave up all rights," he said slowly in spoken English. "Legally, you're nothing to her. Go away." I backed up Warren's statement, looking at my son, and feeling absolutely nothing but contempt. They're right, I said. You're nothing to Lily Marcus, and you made sure of that when you signed those adoption papers. You wanted her gone, and she's gone from your life. Now she's part of mine, and you don't get to interfere. Marcus tried to argue for another minute, saying this wasn't over, that he'd find a way to stop this, but Warren crossed his arms and stood firm, and eventually Marcus stormed off toward the parking lot, yelling threats over his line. Shoulder that I knew he'd never follow through on. After Marcus left, I apologized profusely to Warren and Cora, mortified that they'd had to witness that ugly scene, terrified they'd change their minds about letting me see Lily. Cora signed reassurance that wasn't my fault, and Warren added that they'd half expected something like this might happen. We need to be more careful now, Warren signed seriously. For Lily's protection. I understood completely. Told them I'd do whatever they needed, follow any rules they set, just please don't cut me out because of Marcus's behavior. They conferred briefly and signed, then Cora told me something that made me start crying all over again. We talked last night and we've decided we want to tell Lily the truth, that you're her biological grandmother. Warren added, she's old enough to understand, and you've earned the right to be honest with her. We agreed my next visit would be at their home in Sacramento, and that's when they'd explain to Lily who I really was. I returned to Sacramento in mid-July, and the drive felt completely different from the nerve-wracking trip I'd made in June, still anxious, but now with a foundation of hope instead of terror. Warren and Cora lived in a comfortable ranch-style house in a quiet Sacramento neighborhood, and the moment I walked in, I noticed all the modifications that made it a deaf household. Doorbell lights that flashed when someone rang a video phone system for making calls, visual alerts for the smoke detector and other appliances, family photos on every wall showing Lily at various ages surrounded by her deaf family. Lily was excited to see me again, greeting me at the door with another enthusiastic hug, and immediately pulling me toward her room to show me her artwork, dozens of paintings and drawings covering the walls in an explosion of color and creativity. After dinner, which was surprisingly relaxed, with everyone signing throughout the meal, Cora suggested we all sit in the living room because they had something important to tell Lily. I could see Lily's curiosity spike that kid radar that knows when adults are about to say something serious, and she sat on the couch between Warren and Cora, looking slightly worried. Cora started signing slowly and clearly, making sure Lily understood every word. Sweetie, we need to tell you something important about Ruth. Lily looked at me with big eyes, and I tried to smile reassuringly while my heart tried to climb out of my chest. Ruth is your grandmother, Cora signed. Your biological father's mother. She's the mom of the man who helped make you before you were born. Lily processed this information, her face scrunching up in concentration, and then she signed "What's biological?" Warren took over the explanation, using age-appropriate language to describe how adoption works. Before you were born, you grew in another woman's body, he signed. That woman and a man made you together, but they couldn't take care of you the way you needed. So they chose Mama Cora and me to be your parents forever, to raise you and love you. Lily nodded, because they'd explained adoption to her before, and she signed, I know you told me I'm adopted, and that my birth parents couldn't handle having a deaf baby. Cora continued, the man who helped make you is Ruth's son, which makes Ruth your grandmother, by biology, by blood connection. Lily turned to look at me directly, her blue eyes searching my face, and signed the question that would either make or break this moment. You're my grandma, I nodded, signing back with tears streaming down my face. Yes, and I've been looking for you since you were a baby because I love you and I never wanted you to be given away. Lily thought about this for what felt like an eternity, her 7-year-old brain working through complicated concepts about family and biology and love, and then she signed something that surprised me. Why, just that one sign asking me to explain something that felt obvious but was actually quite complex. Because I loved you from the moment I held you in the hospital, I signed as clearly as I could. Your birth father and his wife didn't want to keep you because you're deaf, but I begged them to let me raise you. They said no, and gave you to Warren and Cora, and that made me sad because I wanted to know you. So I spent 4 years learning sign language and searching for you, because I wanted to be able to talk to you when I finally found you. Lily absorbed this, and I could see her putting pieces together, understanding that I'd made an effort her biological parents hadn't. She looked at Cora and Warren, seeking their reassurance, and they both nodded encouragingly. Then Lily asked the question I'd been most afraid of. Do I have to call you Grandma? I realized she was worried about hurting my feelings, but also protecting her relationship with her other grandparents, Warren's mom and Cora's parents, who'd been in her life since infancy. I signed back quickly. You can call me whatever you want, whatever feels comfortable. Even just Ruth is fine. I don't need a special name, I just want to know you. Lily smiled, a huge, relieved smile that lit up her whole face, and signed, Can I call you Grandma Ruth? That way I have three grandmas. Grandma Helen from Mama Cora's side, Grandma Dorothy from Papa Warren's side, and you. The simple joy in her signing, the way she'd found a solution that included everyone, made me break down completely, crying so hard I couldn't sign back right away. When I composed myself enough to respond, I signed, I would love that more than anything in the world, and Lily got up from the couch to give me another hug. You're so lucky, I signed when we pulled apart. You have so many people who love you. Lily signed back with the confidence of a child who's always known she was wanted, I know. She launched into an explanation of all her grandparents and their various roles in her life, and I realized she was making space for me in an already full and loving family structure, which was more than I'd ever dared hope for. The months that followed, from July through December of 2022, brought a rhythm to my life that I'd never imagined possible. I visited Sacramento once a month, spending weekends with the Fletcher family, learning about Lily's world from the inside. She showed me around California School for the Deaf, introducing me to her teachers and friends with obvious pride. This is my Grandma Ruth, she'd sign to anyone who would pay attention. She learned sign language just for me. I volunteered in Lily's art class as an assistant, helping kids with supplies and setup, while the deaf teacher led the actual instruction, and I loved watching Lily in her element, confident and creative, and surrounded by peers who communicated the same way she did. Christmas of 2022 was the most meaningful holiday I'd celebrated since Gerald died, spent at Warren and Cora's house with both sides of their extended family, probably 30 people total, almost all of them deaf or codas, children of deaf adults who'd grown up signing. The house was full of flying hands and laughter and the particular energy that deaf gatherings have, visual and vibrant and completely inclusive. Lily gave me a handmade painting she'd done in art class, a family tree, with every branch labeled with names in careful printing. On one branch, right next to Warren's parents and Cora's parents, was my name, Grandma Ruth, written in purple glitter paint. I cried happy tears while Lily hugged me and signed, Do you like it? I signed back, It's the best present anyone has ever given me, and I meant it with my whole heart. Marcus made one final attempt to insert himself into the situation in January of 2023, and it was so predictable I almost laughed when the legal letter arrived. His lawyer sent official correspondence to Warren and Cora demanding visitation rights with Lily and claiming that Marcus had experienced a change of heart and wanted to build a relationship with his biological daughter. The letter was full of legal language about parental bonds and the importance of knowing biological family, carefully avoiding any mention of why he'd given Lily up in the first place. Warren and Cora's lawyer, a fierce deaf woman named Patricia who specialized in adoption law, sent back a response that was basically a legal middle finger. You terminated all parental rights voluntarily, her letter stated in crisp legal prose. You have no standing to request visitation or any other contact with the child. This matter is closed. Marcus tried reaching out to me next, calling from yet another new number that I almost didn't answer, and when I did pick up, he launched into a speech he'd clearly rehearsed. Help me, Mom, he said, his voice taking on that pleading tone he'd used as a kid when he wanted something. I made a mistake, and I want to fix it. I want to know Lily to be part of her life. You could talk to Warren and Cora for me, convince them to give me a chance. I listened to his entire speech without interrupting, and then I responded with absolute clarity. You had 9 months before she was born and 7 years after she was born to change your mind, I said. You had dozens of opportunities to be a father to Lily, and you chose not to take any of them. It's too late now, Marcus. She has parents who love her, and a life that doesn't need you in it. Marcus tried to guilt me, saying I was keeping him from his daughter, and I corrected him sharply. She's not your daughter, I said. She's Warren and Cora's daughter. You're just the sperm donor who happened to share some DNA. He threatened to tell Lily that I'd kept him away from her, and I called his bluff immediately. Go ahead, I said. She's old enough to understand the truth now. We'll show her the adoption papers where you wrote unacceptable defect as the reason for giving her up. We'll let her read your emails about how you didn't want a special needs child. You tell her your version, and we'll tell her the documented truth, and then she can decide who to believe. The silence on the other end told me I'd won, and Marcus hung up without another word. He's never contacted any of us again, and I suspect he never will, because facing what he did would require a level of courage and self-reflection he simply doesn't possess. By the spring of 2023, I'd found a comfortable rhythm with my role in Lily's life, not trying to replace anyone or overstep boundaries, but simply being present as another person who loved her. I attended her school performances and art shows, celebrated her 8th birthday with a painting party she'd planned herself, video chatted with her once a week to practice signing and hear about her week. Our relationship wasn't the traditional grandmother-grandchild bond I'd imagined back when Marcus and Jennifer first announced the pregnancy, but it was real and honest and built on mutual respect. Lily knew I'd searched for her, knew I'd learned an entire language to communicate with her, and that knowledge seemed to matter to her in ways she expressed through art and spontaneous hugs, and the way she always made sure I was included in family activities. One afternoon in April, while Lily and I sat in Warren and Cora's backyard painting together, she asked me a question I'd been waiting for. Grandma Ruth, she signed, putting down her paintbrush. Why did my birth dad not want me? It was a loaded question, one that could have damaged her if I answered carelessly, so I thought carefully before responding. He was scared I signed honestly because he didn't understand that being deaf isn't a bad thing. He thought you would have a hard life and he wouldn't know how to help you, so he made a cowardly choice. But he was wrong about everything. You have a wonderful life and wonderful parents who understand you perfectly. Lily processed this, then signed, "Are you glad Papa Warren and Mama Cora got me instead of you raising me?" It was maybe the most mature question I'd ever heard from an 8-year-old, and it deserved a thoughtful answer. I'm glad you have the parents. You have, I signed carefully. They understand deaf culture and deaf language in ways I never could, and they've given you exactly what you needed. If I'd raised you, I would have tried my best, but you might not have been as happy or confident. So yes, even though it hurt not to raise you myself, I'm glad you ended up where you did. Lily smiled and signed, I'm glad too, because Papa and Mama are the best parents. But I'm also glad you found me, Grandma Ruth. That simple statement delivered with such casual sincerity made me understand that everything I'd been through, all the pain and searching and learning, had been worth it for this moment. As I sit here now, reflecting on the journey from that terrible February day in 2018 to this place of peace in 2025, I've learned lessons that changed who I am fundamentally. Family isn't defined by blood or biology or legal documents, but by who shows up, who does the work, who learns your language, both literally and figuratively. Marcus shared DNA with Lily, but he's not her father in any meaningful sense. Warren and Cora raised her, loved her, built her world around her needs, and they're her real parents in every way that matters. I learned that deafness isn't a disability or a tragedy, but simply a different way of experiencing the world with its own language and culture and beauty. Lily taught me that lesson more powerfully than any book or class ever could, showing me through her confidence and joy that she doesn't feel like she's missing anything at all. I learned that love requires action, not just feeling. I could have loved Lily from a distance, mourning what I'd lost without doing anything to change it, but that wouldn't have been real love. Real love meant learning ASL for 4 years without knowing if I'd ever get to use it with her. Real love meant searching through dead ends and disappointments, spending money I couldn't really afford on private investigators, and lawyers refusing to give up even when everyone told me I should. Real love meant respecting Warren and Cora's boundaries instead of demanding what I wanted, trusting that slow and careful was better than fast and forced. These weren't easy lessons, and I failed at them more times than I succeeded, but each failure taught me something about the difference between selfish love and selfless love. Warren and Cora showed me what real parenting looks like. The kind that puts the child's needs ahead of the parent's comfort or convenience, or plans for a perfect life. When they adopted Lily, they committed to learning everything about raising a deaf child, connecting with deaf community, ensuring she had deaf role models and peers and culture. They never treated her deafness as something to fix or overcome, but as a fundamental part of who she is, something to celebrate and embrace. Watching them parent Lily has made me understand just how monstrous Marcus's choice really was, not because he couldn't handle raising a deaf child, but because he never even tried. He looked at his daughter and saw only what she lacked, instead of who she was, and that failure of imagination and compassion is something I'll never understand or forgive. Marcus taught me painful lessons, too, about how children we raise can still make choices that devastate us, about how sometimes love isn't enough to make someone be better than they choose to be. I spent 29 years raising him to be kind and compassionate, modeling those values, teaching him to see people's humanity before their differences. Somehow, despite all that, he grew into a man who could give away his baby for being deaf, who could refer to her as a mistake, who could replace her before she was a month old. I've had to accept that his choices are his own, not a reflection of my parenting or my values, and that acceptance has been harder than anything else. I lost my son when I gained my granddaughter, and I've had to make peace with that trade, knowing I'd make the same choice every single time. The deaf community. They never had to do that motherly obsession, but they chose to embrace me anyway, seeing my sincerity and commitment. Through them, I learned that deaf people don't need pity or charity or hearing people trying to fix them. What they need is respect, access, and hearing people willing to meet them in their language instead of demanding they accommodate ours. That lesson has applications far beyond deafness, teaching me about all the ways we expect others to adapt to us instead of choosing to learn their ways. Looking back now, 7 years after Lily was born, and 2 years after I finally found her, I understand that finding her was only part of my journey. The real transformation happened in the learning, the searching, the refusing to give up, the becoming someone worthy of being in her life. The Ruth who held that baby for 20 minutes in February 2018 wouldn't have been ready to be Grandma Ruth to an 8-year-old deaf girl. That Ruth didn't know sign language, didn't understand deaf culture, didn't know how to communicate across that divide. The Ruth Phi became, through 4 years of study and searching and growing, is someone Lily can actually have a relationship with, someone who speaks her language and understands her world. The journey made me into the grandmother I needed to be, and that's a gift Lily gave me even before we were reunited. Some people have asked me if I regret anything, if I would have done something differently knowing what I know now. The only thing I regret is not being firmer with Marcus during Jennifer's pregnancy, not fighting harder to stop the adoption before it happened. But even that regret is tempered by the knowledge that Lily got exactly the parents she needed, and my fighting might have just delayed the inevitable while making everything messier. Everything else, the searching and learning and refusing to give up, I'd do exactly the same way because it led me here to weekends in Sacramento and video chats in ASL and a relationship with my granddaughter that's built on honesty and effort and mutual respect. The final lesson I learned is about persistence and faith. Not religious faith necessarily, but faith that love matters, that showing up matters, that doing the work matters, even when the outcome is uncertain. I spent 4 years not knowing if I'd ever find Lily learning a language I might never get to use, with her searching for someone who might not want to be found. Every single day of those 4 years I could have given up, could have listened to Lorraine and Marcus and everyone else telling me to move on. But I didn't because I'd made a promise to a baby I'd held for 20 minutes, and keeping that promise mattered more than comfort or convenience or protecting myself from potential heartbreak. That stubborn persistence is what got me here, and it's taught me that we're capable of more than we think when we love someone enough to do the impossible. Now, when people ask me for advice about difficult family situations or seemingly impossible searches, I tell them Lily's story and share what I learned. Love is a language you learn through action, not just feeling. Family is who shows up and does the work. Don't give up on people who can't give up on themselves. Learn to communicate in someone else's language instead of demanding they learn yours. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is respecting that they're exactly who they're supposed to be, not trying to change or fix them to match your expectations or plans. So here's my question for all of you who've listened to this journey from heartbreak to healing. What language do you need to learn for someone you love? It doesn't have to be sign language or even a spoken language. Maybe it's the language of listening without trying to fix, or showing up without being asked, or apologizing without making excuses, or accepting someone without conditions. We all have people in our lives who speak languages we haven't bothered to learn, and every single one of those relationships is an opportunity to do better, to be better, to choose love over comfort. Drop a comment and tell me about a time you learned someone else's language literally or figuratively, or about someone in your life you wish you'd made more effort to understand. I read every single comment, and I love hearing your stories, because all of our journeys are connected by these threads of love and loss and finding our way back to each other. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because there are more stories coming about families and healing and refusing to give up on the people we love. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to learn someone's language, never too late to show up and do the work, never too late to fight for love. Thank you for being here with me through this whole journey from that hospital room in 2018 to this moment of peace and gratitude. I hope you find your Lily, whatever form that takes in your life, and I hope you have the courage to spend years learning their language if that's what it takes. The work is worth it, the waiting is worth it, the heartbreak and uncertainty are all worth it when you finally get to sign "I love you" to someone who's been waiting their whole life to hear it in their own language. May you all find the courage to keep your promises, the strength to learn new languages, and the wisdom to know that family is built through action, not just biology. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next story.